All right, cool. Let's jump into case study number 2. This one is kind of related to what we're doing right now on a podcast. So this case study is all about how to leverage podcasts to get in front of the people that you want.
Yeah, so it's for the same company that I was working for with the first case study. And one of the things that was a challenge for us was building up our own audience and getting people to sign up to a newsletter, because not everybody wants to sign up to a newsletter. So you put out some content and it kind of goes into the wind, and you just hope that people will see it. Of course, SEO can kick in. So what we thought about doing was, well, who else shares the same audience that we want to work with, but sell or offer a different service to that audience? So there's no kind of direct competition there at all. So we identified a number of podcasts which had the audience that we wanted to reach. And then we reached out to the podcast hosts, asked them if they're interested in talking about this topic and this topic, which is related to, again, to that audience. We tried to make those topics as valuable as possible to the audience who are listening, because we thought that podcast hosts will care about the quality of the guests, and they certainly did. We also asked the hosts if they wanted to change anything. Like, it wasn't us coming on here to talk about ABC and that's it. So it was very much a collaborative process. This is about 4 or 5 years ago now. So this strategy hadn't been done as much as perhaps it is now. And we managed to land a number of different interviews on sales-related podcasts. One interview turned into 8 conversations, and 4 of those from that 8 turned into customers. So it was a really quick ROI. But what I learned after is that it's not always that quick, and it's sometimes a lot longer game that you need to play.
Yeah. I really enjoy podcasting as a way, obviously, just to meet new people, but I agree. There is some great new business opportunities, and obviously you're trying to build a genuine relationship. Otherwise, it falls apart. But I think that what I've been on other people's podcasts, or they've been on mine, there's never been a feeling of like, okay, here comes the hard pitch. But
exactly.
No.
The other thing that's come from that as well is a few years later, people still get in touch with you saying, "Oh, I heard you on the so-and-so podcast talking about XYZ. Can I just pick your brains? Or are you still working at that company? I need help with that." And I think that's what's great about podcasts. You mentioned evergreen as the previous strategy, but the podcasting space is completely evergreen too. And what I think is extremely powerful is when somebody has the challenge or problem, and you've spoken about that challenge or problem, and you did a good job conveying your knowledge and expertise, most people, if they want to kind of get in touch with you, they will, because they can use the fact that they heard you on the interview to start that conversation.
Yeah, the other thing too, like I've noticed when people have reached out saying, "Oh, I just watched that podcast about whatever topic," the dynamic really changes. So if they're coming to me to use my agency, all of a sudden they've already said like, "I already know who you are. I get you. Like, you don't even have to like do anything. I just want to talk." And that's also fun for me, because then I don't have to do the 5 to 10 minute overview of everything. So it's really efficient.
Yeah, I've had it a couple times where someone says, "Yep, I get it. I get what you're about. I like what you're about. How do I work with you? How does it work?"
Yes.
And I mean, that's just such a great conversation to lead to a sale.
Yeah. So take us through, like, I want to get a little bit more detailed on this strategy. Like, what are it seems very straightforward, right? But give us like the steps that you have to go through to do this successfully.
Yeah, I'll kind of give you like the 80-20, so the 20% of the things that you can do, which gives you the most impact. So when you're trying to identify the steps are: research the podcast, reach out to the podcast, manage the back and forth of the booking, and then turn up and do a good interview. So 4 steps there. The first one is, how do you find the podcasts that are speaking to the same audience? A little bit like what we talked about in the first case study of reaching out to people who have already spoken on those shows. So I would look at who are the other influencers or other people that share my audience, and then just put in their name and then podcast, and see which podcast they've been on. And you can make an assumption that they've vetted that podcast or that show is right for them based on the audience. And you obviously can double check that. There's a great website called listennotes.com. It's probably the most comprehensive directory of podcasts. It's pretty much free to use as well. So that way you can actually search for keywords. So if you're trying to get to HR directors, so HR or human resources podcasts, there'll be lots of podcasts with that title. And Listen Notes gives you some metadata around each of those podcasts as well. So that's the research step. Can I go any deeper on that, Steve?
Yeah, go deeper. Go deeper. Yeah. I like it.
So when you are looking at the shows, one thing that's really useful to do is pull out a couple of guests or things that have been spoken about previously and make a note of those, because that's what you can use to increase your outreach or the likelihood of them replying to your outreach.
Yeah. Yeah, one thing I want to get your thoughts on too, on the actual outreach. what I've learned when I've done it for my show is 3 sentences max. You know, like that's it for that initial email. What's your experience been like?
Yeah, I think rule number 1 is make it all about the host and their audience. Rule number 2 is keep it short as possible. And number 3 is to remove the work for the host. So how I would approach that is saying something along the lines of, hey, Steve, I saw you had so-and-so, so influencer in my industry on your podcast who talked about XYZ, wondering or curious if your audience would be interested in a different view or another strategy, or I actually disagree with that strategy and here's why. Would that be of interest to your audience? So maybe a little bit more than 3 sentences, definitely 3 paragraphs, no more. But you're making it extremely relevant. You show that you've done your research by referencing a previous guest and what they spoke about. You're doing the work for the host to come up with a topic. Of course, listen to that show first because certain podcasts have certain structure to them as well. So you want to make sure that you're not trying to convince the podcast host to change their whole structure. And then that call to action at the end is just it's known as a soft call to action. Would your audience find this valuable? If you've done that research, you've made that relevant message, there's never going to be a no to that answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the closing question too. Nothing like a good close in an email. Good question.
Yeah.
All right. What else about the case study would you like to share?
Yeah. So from that case study, like I said, I generated customers straight away and I got lucky with that, to be honest. But the reason why I was able to convert those customers is because I went on a really, really, really specific podcast, which was about cold email, where the podcast host wants you to talk through a case study, very similar to this type of format, which was specific results and how you got to those results. The podcast was quite new. It didn't have millions of downloads. And this is the key with this strategy or as a case study here is you don't need the biggest podcasts. You just need the ones that have the most relevant audience that you want to reach. So that would be something else that I would share about this particular case study.